ladies and gentlemen, as global power dynamics evolve, India, remember, is emerging as a pivotal force in shaping a new world order. During its G20 presidency, India successfully facilitated consensus on key issues like debt restructuring and climate financing, showcasing its ability to lead on critical challenges such as trade imbalances and sustainable development.
So the big question then is, how will India continue to navigate these shifts and define the future of international relations? To find out, please join us in welcoming former chief economist and creator of the BRICS acronym, that's Jim O'Neill. Ladies and gentlemen, a huge round of applause for him, please. Jim's in the house. Jim, welcome. And in conversation with him is going to be Nikunj Dalmia. Nikunj, over to you.
Well, guys, let's put a louder clap for Jim O'Neill. Jim O'Neill has come from London, even louder. Jim O'Neill has come directly from the airport. Yes. Is it true that you coined the acronym BRIC, or is that fiction?
It's true.
Do you feel proud about it? Because BRIC is now breaking?
It means I get invited to wonderful things like this, so 23 years later. So yeah, of course, I'm very proud. I'm very lucky. Okay. I never had the slightest idea it would become the huge thing that it did. So I feel very fortunate.
So BRICS, if I may just repeat for the audience here, B was Brazil.
Brazil, B for Brazil, R for Russia, I for somewhere, and C for China.
Okay.
And the S was always small for plural. And obviously, capital S is South Africa's part of the political group of the BRICS, but I never included South Africa.
When you coined BRICS that time, it was all about China, and now it is becoming all about India. Which BRIC nation has surprised you? Which BRIC nation has disappointed you? And which BRIC nation
for people here in India to grasp the opportunity, and it's really important with this title you've chose. This is India's sweet spot. So if India is really going to develop a lot of momentum to be the third largest economy in the world, it has to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, because after that, the so-called demographic dividend for India starts to fade. In terms of disappointments, No two ways about it. Russia followed by Brazil. And they suffer from the classic, and I wrote about it at the time, they suffer from the classic so-called commodities curse. And one of the very interesting things about the world developing during my lifetime, many countries that have a lot of commodities struggle because they end up being wasteful with those commodities. And you see that in each of those two countries, and sadly, even more so in some ways with South Africa. So the two best are the two biggest, China and India.
The necessary conditions which have made United States the largest economy of the world was they constantly innovated, and there was constant innovation which led to productivity.
Yeah.
China went on the other side. They constantly ensured that they remained the manufacturing hub of the world, and they were able to gain more in terms of prominence in the world. What makes India unique, and what would be the USP of India if you compare that with the history of some other countries who've crossed the $5 trillion hurdle?
Yeah. Well, we will find out. But it goes back to what I deliberately said a few minutes ago. This is India's chance to really demonstrate its uniquity with some of the natural things that in India's favor. What are they? So the first of which, it is the only one of the BRIC countries that has a relatively young, dynamic population. So it still has, for the next 10 to 15 years, the likelihood of a significant further rise in the labor force. Definitely don't have that in China. You've not had that in Russia for 20 years. And Brazil has already started to turn. So that's unique. The only other big so-called emerging country that's close to, or there's two, Indonesia, similar, but less people, of course, and actually the beautiful but complicated country, Nigeria. So in that sense, India, I mean, the BRICS is really unique. The second thing, which actually might be a tactical advantage as we go back into what I call a Trump-influenced world, a lot of India's growth has been based on domestic demand. Most economists like myself would often say one of India's weaknesses is that it's not as big a share of global trade as other great success stories in Asia. But maybe for the next few years, that's not a negative. Because as we know, or we think we know, Donald Trump is going to probably use tariffs or the threat of tariffs to try and make these countries less important in trade. And I don't think India has that problem. The third thing, which is really a special thing of the moment, and I can never figure out whether it's fortune, it's just luck or deliberate. India is wanted to be a friend by everyone in the G7 and by everybody in the BRICS. No one else is in that position. And I think some credit has to go to Modi for that. But whether that's true or not, it is an incredible, fortunate thing in this very, very complicated stage of how the world is at the moment. So I would say all of those things are good. A strange thing is the English language. Obviously, one of India's biggest successes the past 20 years is its role in global services support and export of them. I think the ease in which the English language is used here is definitely a major factor of that. And you don't have that in the other BRICS. And so I think if you combine all of those things together, they're the things that India needs to really exploit more and probably for more Indian people, because there's obviously a lot of things that India has challenges with as well still.
We are going through extraordinary times when the global monetary policy or the central bank monetary policy has been extremely loose. Interest rates have been in a record low and the government deficits are at a record high.
Yeah.
So given that we are in for a volatile global environment, how can India grow if the world is contracting or if world is in a messy place?
Well, one of the answers to that is I've already touched on, because India's growth has frequently been driven by domestic demand. That means India is in control of a lot of what happens to India. To some degree, and we saw this in 2008, when there was a global shock, China had to dramatically change parts of its policies. Otherwise, the Chinese economy would have become a lot weaker a lot sooner. And look at Japan in that sense, far too dependent on things that are going on outside the country. Another example close to me in Europe is Germany. Germany, amazingly, has grown even weaker than the UK since COVID. And it's primarily because of Germany's vulnerability to things it can't control, like China, like the emergence of electric cars. So suddenly Germany has lost its global edge. India doesn't have that issue unless we have a collapse. If we had a collapse in the internet and global outsourcing and global services, who knows what happens out there, but that would be a risk. But I don't think India is as exposed to some of these other issues as many other parts of the world. It is obviously vulnerable to a very large rise in oil prices and commodity prices. It's probably vulnerable to, if we had an unexpected big rise in US interest rates. The markets right now are expecting them to come down. But in that sense, I think India is relatively protected about some of these really big risks out there, which I agree are sources of great uncertainty for many countries.
So, Jim, if I just put all the ingredients in the melting pot, which is India's macro stability,
yeah,
political stability,
yeah,
fiscal deficit is coming under control.
yeah.
More importantly, we have a population which understands English, which is the business language of the world, and the first one which you alluded to, which is the young population, where the entrepreneurship seems to be coming back. Do you think 6 to 7% growth for India could be there for next couple of decades?
So, as I think you know, and again, on the journey coming here and preparing for it in the past 2 weeks, I was reading some of my old research. This is something from 2007. The 10 things that India needs to do to reach its potential. And again, as a challenge to you and for any advisors to policymakers, India should be trying to grow by close to 10%. The demographics are so strong that if India could boost some key parts of productivity, it wouldn't be difficult for India to do still the next decade something closer to 10 than 6. And of course, I gather you panels discussed this morning. The flip side of that, if India only grows at 6, the GDP per capita, because you have so many people, won't rise that much. I think today it's about $3,000 a head. So I think India should aspire to actually grow by 8-9%, which it could do based on the kind of things that I've looked at for 30, 40 years. And in that sense, I'd like to see more ambition. One of the encouraging things that I noticed that links to the 10, back in 2007, I think I'm right in saying, India only had one university or tertiary sector institution recognized in the world's top 100. Today it has 7, which is a very positive thing to have happened because you need more of that. And doing that and trying to allow more young people to get more and more diverse skills are the kind of things that are needed to deliver this additional growth, in my opinion.
What are your thoughts on the way digital India is now moving?
Yeah.
The fact that we have UPI,
Yeah.
we have the backbone which is now backed by Geo broadband. We have programs like Aadhaar which are centered around identification. So for any country to grow now, productivity gains are coming via AI or digital. Do you think India is right up there in terms of global averages, global standard and global rate of change?
I think it's probably certainly in the mix of being the best of the large emerging countries in this field. And hearing you mention UPI, I remember when it was first mooted. Of course, if my mind remembers correctly, it was a good 3 years before Modi became the leader. And when I heard about it, I thought this could be an incredible thing for India. And I think it's proved to become so. And so that's exactly what many other countries around the world struggle to do. And hats off to the people that pushed that initiative for India. And I think, as you say in your question, that strength is an enormous, I'd call it certainly a tactical strength, and maybe a structural strength for the world in which we are emerging in, where, especially with AI, there's going to be more and more of these kind of things going on.
So before I change gears and talk about your view on the world, if I summarize your view on India, your view is that we have potential and ability to grow at 6 to 7%. It could be 8 to 9%. We have all the ingredients like you mentioned, and we are digital ready with the dynamism of a young population. Why we should really fast track to the top 3 economies in the world.
I mean, to be really candid with you, if India's not significantly bigger than Germany and Japan by 2030, I personally would be really worried for India. The next bit should be easy. I'm going to say, I was thinking whether I should say this or not. India should set itself the challenge of being 3 times as big as Japan within another 15 years. Because that's how big the natural advantages are at this point in life. Japan has dreadful demographics, and it still has poor productivity, and it's very vulnerable to a world that does less trade in goods. So it should be really easy for India to become quite a bit bigger. But if India really wants to get to be really big and more wealthy for more Indian people, it should want to become a lot bigger. And, I don't know, become half the size of the US by 2035 or something.
Fantastic. So nice to hear that endorsement coming from you, the man who actually saw the potential when he coined the word BRIC. I'm going to change gears and talk about the view of the world now.
Yeah.
There is a change in regime in the United States. Everyone is saying it's like someone has pressed the reset button again. Do you think Donald Trump will press the reset button again?
Is he going to what?
Press the reset button again.
Does Donald Trump himself know what he's going to do? Like everybody else, I sit and watch and read these things about everybody who thinks they know what Donald Trump's going to do. I'm not sure Donald Trump knows what he's going to do. I think he enjoys the game of dealing with people. You know, a silly example, when I look back on his famous attempts to become a friend of the North Korean leader, he seemed to have no idea what it was he was going to do when he managed to meet him. I noticed with great interest, yesterday I read that he has invited President Xi to his inauguration. I mean, that's quite an imaginative thing to do. We have a world of finance and business that is convinced that relations between the US and China is going to get worse. Maybe it won't. I don't know. And intellectually, it makes it fascinating, but I would not want to be overly confident in predicting that Trump's going to do X, Y, and Z, because I don't think he knows yet. What I would quickly add, I think he's chosen a very, very experienced person in macroeconomics to be his Treasury Secretary. And a very important thing that, again, I don't know how it will evolve, is how much Trump is going to trust Scott Bessent or delegate economic issues to Scott. I was asked by a Washington magazine yesterday, interestingly, to write a piece about what did I think of the possibility of a modern version of the so-called Plaza Accord, which is just the very fact I was asked that is interesting. And you can see the conditions for some sort of grand global deal where China agrees to stimulate its consumer, Europe agrees to boost its defense spending, Germany agrees to put more auto plants in the US, and the US then decides we don't need these tariffs because they're all going to buy more US things. And that would be an incredibly constructive thing for the world economy. But one other thing to say, it would probably also be very good for equity markets outside the US.
Well, Jim, the way you've really summarized the India growth story for us, thank you very much, and thank you for endorsing it with such easy concept and ideas. I've always interacted with you online, but such a pleasure to meet you in person and really talk about the India growth story. Thank you for being part of IEC, and such a pleasure to meet you in person. Let's put our hands together for Jim O'Neill, the man who coined BRICS. He feels that India has a long, long way to go. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much, Jim, for that fascinating discussion, and thank you for making it to the India Economic Conclave. Hope you have a great stay. Well, moving on, ladies and gentlemen.